moving to my topic of Israel and the global economy. I think I'm making this presentation at the time that, believe me, I'm a close follower of the Israeli economy. There has never been such a strong moment in terms of the state of the Israeli economy, both in absolute terms and in relative terms. Okay, Israel's economic position has never been as strong, internally speaking, in terms of the functioning of the economy, the way that we are seeing it here. And I can share with you about this a little story, which is that about a month ago, I had a meeting with representatives of Moody's. Moody's, as you know, is one of the credit rating companies, those that attach different countries and different companies, AAA, AA, BBB, whatever credit rating. And we know three main companies like that, Standard & Poor's, Moody's, and Fitch. The lady that was heading the delegation began the conversation with me. When they come to Israel, they typically want to meet with economists from academia and from the private sector, so we have sort of a conversation over coffee. And when we began the conversation, the lady turns to me and says, Mr. Lederman, are we missing something? So I looked at her and said, well, is this the way you want to start? I mean, what do you mean? She says, look, when we look at the fiscal situation of the country, inflation, unemployment, etc., the macroeconomic situation, the functioning of the private sector, things are operating in an extremely sound and reasonable way. So, are we missing something? Because normally when they come, they are saying, okay, we have A, B, C working well, but there is a phenomenon, D, E, F. Can you explain to me, etc.? Of course, I told them, look, I'm a very patriotic person. I'm not going to tell you, the credit agency, what is wrong with my country. So obviously, she was laughing at that, and then we talked about the nice way to talk about this is to talk about the challenges for the future, and then that's a very elegant way of including a few things. But again, this is something that gives you an idea of the type of moment that we as economists and business people are living right now in Israel. And I can tell you that when I made Aliyah, Diane mentioned that I made Aliyah from Argentina in 1969. When I made Aliyah to Israel in the first 2, 3, 4 years, I sort of, sometimes when walking in Jerusalem or Tel Aviv, I was saying to myself, am I in Latin America or I'm in a different country? Because economically speaking, Israel of that time was a country with high inflation, with banking crisis, with deficits in the government account, with a tremendous deficit in our external accounts, with lots of devaluations of the shekel, lot of economic and political instability. And when we were looking at the US or Europe, we were seeing a very stable environment, places that had a relatively balanced accounts in terms of the fiscal, government, external accounts, and so on and so forth. When we look at the conditions nowadays, okay, there is a major economic crisis, and I don't have to overemphasize this, in the Western world. In the US, you know, there is still some mileage to go before we can say that the crisis is over. But especially in Europe, where the whole Eurozone is in a tremendous crisis, not only an economic crisis, but a crisis of leadership. Okay, basically, because here, if you have any complaints, if you want to criticize, there is an administration in Washington, D.C. In the Eurozone, there is one currency, the euro, but each government maintains its sovereignty, its political sort of attitudes, its economic policies, and so on. So now Israel and some emerging markets are looking like the more relative environment, and we look at the US and Europe sort of what we call in economics out of equilibrium, sort of under some disturbance, and that requires sooner or later some convergence to more reasonable conditions. Now, Israel, once again, is in this position, and it is not that we did not have some external threats. Over the last few years, as you know, we had hostilities. We had the Lebanon II war in 2006, and we had the Gaza operation in 2008. So it's not a situation where you can say, well, it is all due to the geopolitical things. But basically, the recent economic crisis took the Israeli economy on a very strong standing after years of growing at a rate of 5%, with a strong labor market. In Israel, at the time that the sort of global crisis came in, there were no bubbles in the, whether it is the housing sector, banking, or credit in the economy. Our population is saving about 15% of GDP, of income. Israel, you know, it has a tradition of saving, and we have a lot of institutional saving in pension funds, mutual funds, insurance companies, and so on and so forth. And there are, of course, some structural, very positive structural features. Israel, on a comparative basis, has a relatively young population. If you look at some of the problems of the Eurozone and some of the problems of the Japanese economy, it is the problem of an aging population. And when you have a relatively good demography working for you, lots of new young couples moving from a 2-bedroom to a 3-bedroom, you know, trying to sort of spend more, educate their children, and so on, that is a very positive factor for our economy. We also we have relatively sound government and central bank regulation of our banks and of the overall financial system. Clearly, in the case of the US, a lot of the subprime crisis was a problem of a lack of proper regulation, which, by the way, was part also of the Enron WorldCom phenomenon in 2001. I mean, so we are, in the case of the US, we are talking about already 2 crises in less than a decade. We have seen some of the dividends from the good economic performance of Israel in place. In 2010, Israel finally got admitted to the OECD, okay, which for many years we were applying for that, and there were always political, economic obstacles for that. And second, Israel was sort of upgraded in the different indices of stock market as an advanced economy rather than an emerging market economy. Okay, and this also happened in the year of 2010. One important element that I think has to be sort of stressed is the fact that in the Israeli economy, the whole phenomenon of excess leverage that you had in the US, especially on the consumer, but also on the mortgage market and so on, again, due to the fact that it's a relatively small country, there is the Bank of Israel, the Ministry of Finance, financial regulation, etc., has been relatively much more easy to manage this, and luckily, we did not develop all this complicated financial architecture that has been developed here and in other financial markets with lots of derivatives and who knows what, that all those financial pyramids that you buy an asset or a derivative and you don't really know what is really the base, the base for that sort of a trade or some sort of a position. So this is where we are, and I can tell you that there is a lot of interest in the Israeli economy. The Hilton Hotel, David Intercontinental in Tel Aviv, the King David in Jerusalem, it is very difficult to get a room these days. These hotels are completely full, not of tourists. I mean, maybe when they come in, they are defined partly as tourists, but a lot of business delegations coming from abroad, trying to learn about the Israeli economy and to see what can be done in Israel. As one business person from the US told me, look, for me, things have gotten worse. I used to wait at the Hilton for 3 minutes to the elevator. Now I'm waiting for 7, 8 minutes to the elevator. So, and it's not a Hilton phenomenon, I guess it's for everybody. Where is the Israeli economy now, and what can we say about the main strengths and the main sort of trends that we can see for the future? Here I can only publicize a book that is not of mine. I wish I had written it, but I think it's just must be your sort of immediate reading for if you have not read this on the Israeli economy. This is the book by Dan Senner and Saul Zinger, Startup Nation. Okay, I don't know if you're familiar with this book, but this book sort of tells you the story of Israel, the transformation of Israel from a farming economy, from the agriculture of the kibbutzim of the 1950s, to what Israel is nowadays, to what the business sector is nowadays in Israel. You know, the major transformation that sort of has led Israel as a major, and the universities in Israel as a major sort of center for new ideas, for new developments, especially in the fields of technology, but in medicine, in biotechnology, you just name it, and it is all there. And talking about ideas, there is this very famous quote of George Bernard Shaw that says that you know, if you have an apple and I have an apple and we trade these, at the end of the trade, I have an apple and you have an apple. Okay? If you have an idea and I have an idea and we trade, at the end of the trade, each one of us has two ideas. Okay, so this notion that ideas, initiatives, entrepreneurship, the whole sort of, as Shimon Peres always used to tell his guests, this sort of intellectual anxiety, this restlessness. You know what Shimon Peres has said is the most important contribution of the Jewish people to humanity? Dissatisfaction. Jewish people are never satisfied. Okay? Whenever the Israeli Defense Forces, when the Israeli Defense Forces buy a new technology, this is an example that the authors are giving in their book, they bring a new technology to our army. It's not that they implement it immediately. 3 days after that, they are already making changes in it. Because they don't like this and they don't like that and they don't like this. And so, if in the old days, the Jewish mother used to think that it is a great idea for her son or daughter to marry a lawyer or an economist or a medical doctor, I apologize, Karen. Nowadays it is an entrepreneur, you know, a startup person. Okay, maybe he or she have an idea that will make them be sort of millionaires. And one can mention a lot of contributions of Israel and Israelis to the in terms of inventions. Did you know that cherry tomatoes is an Israeli invention? Okay, anybody that doesn't like cherry tomatoes? Okay, that's an Israeli invention. The discount key that we all use in our computers is an Israeli invention. Babylon, this program for translating instantly on the computer, is an Israeli invention. ICQ, you know, many things going on, of course, in the fields of pharmaceutics, medical. I'm sure Karen will talk about it. There is a lot of research going on in fighting Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's disease, multiple sclerosis, etc., etc. So I think that that's a key sort of reflection of Israel's comparative advantage of something that we will see more and more and more. And I can tell you, I have already about more than 30 years of teaching at Tel Aviv University. And almost any flight I take from Ben Gurion, there is a student of mine. In fact, there are some here, I understand, or please raise your hand. A former student of mine who's now a professor at the University of Southern California. I don't know if there is anybody else, but oh, good to meet you. So I get to meet students that sort of, when I ask them, what are you doing these days? Well, you know, I developed this little chip for making water usage more efficient, and I'm now traveling to Brazil to sell this to Brazilian farmers because now Brazilian agriculture is becoming more efficient. Then I meet someone else that tells me I'm going to China, you know, with this new computer program that does A, B, C, D, etc., etc. I mean, you can see them. This is something that you can really see that all this creativity and so on is going on. And I think that all of this now is being translated into something that, in my modest opinion as an economist, will be something quite of a good investment and a promising investment for the next decade. And it is anything having to do with the green economy, with developing alternative sources of energy, with looking at solar energy, with looking at the development of different new technologies of production, different sources of once again, water use, etc., etc. So from that point of view, I think that is sort of the most promising area that we can see, that anything having to do with the environment, with, once again, where immediately you can think of energy, but there are, of course, other applications there. And if you ask me, what are the main sort of ways to go about this, it is already for a few years that I have been thinking, and I don't think this is a new thought, but it's something that has to be put on the table, that the next sort of challenge for Israeli businesses is to penetrate into Asia, and especially China, India, and those countries that we as economists are predicting now will be the future of economic growth in the years to come. So if any of you is an American investor thinking of coming to Israel to sort of contribute to developing some idea, maybe that starts at Tel Aviv University and then moves on to the private sector, and there have been a lot of these, and then marketing that idea in Asia, in those countries where there is going to be a tremendous demand for new products and new technologies, that in our view is sort of the key trend. Because again, if I look at the world, the US, of course, will always be important for Israel, economically, politically, etc. But the US has its own problems. Europe and the Eurozone are in the middle of a crisis. Japan, as we said, is a country still in crisis with a very sort of great demography, a population that is becoming elderly by the minute. And so from that point of view, the future is over there in Asia. And this idea of exporting Israeli technologies into Asia, where there is going to be a lot of demand, is something that to me, with all modesty, seems as the trade for the years to come. Now, of course, you may want to ask yourself, well, but are we going to be welcome there? And here I can tell you that it is amazing how the Asian countries, especially China, India, Vietnam, Singapore, Hong Kong, look at Israel and the Israeli economic achievements, also the military and technological achievements, with a tremendous admiration. Some people in Asia think that Israel is like is almost a superpower like the USA, and I will not deny it. But this is, some people in Asia really think that the strength of Israel is like the strength of the United States of America. And once again, this admiration and these factors are, of course, quite important elements in there. Of course, and with this I will conclude, and Rosalie, if we have a few minutes, we can open for Q&A in a very brief way. I'd like to conclude just by saying that together with the great opportunities we are having, and we are facing a lot of challenges. And I think the most important challenge is to maintain our technological leadership. Israel has been maintaining a technological gap vis-a-vis its neighbors, which has been important in terms of the army and strategic development. Israel has been maintaining a technological gap vis-a-vis other countries, which made us a sort of a startup nation, as the book is saying. But let us remember, the Chinese, the people in India and Singapore are investing lots of money in universities, in research laboratories, in everything else. And I remember a conversation with Benjamin Netanyahu in his offices when he was a finance minister in the year 2003. And he called me to sort of have a conversation over coffee and discuss some things about the Israeli economy. And at the end of the conversation, I turned to him and I said, Mr. Netanyahu, what is the thing that is worrying you most? This is about the summer of 2003. And he says, Leo, the thing that worries me most is how much the Asian countries are making progress in closing the technological gap with Israel. And I think it is in this context that Tel Aviv University, that our university system, that our educational system in Israel is a pillar that without your support, without the support of the friends abroad, without our support as, you know, Zionists that live in Israel, it will be difficult, it will be almost impossible to maintain. If we don't keep that gap going on, we may run into economic, political, and other difficulties. So let us hope that the machine goes on and that we put our act together and continue being a startup nation where, you know, hopefully we start learning Chinese and the Chinese start learning Hebrew, and then we all benefit from that. Thank you very much.